Here we have the turntable. It's a BSR UA25, I believe. Well, that's what the label says. Now, it does, well, it's switched off at the moment, and the actual turntable spins. It's not jammed up or anything. So we'll put it onto manual, and we still don't have anything. Well, there's a click. Okay, so it's just spinning. So that should have resistance to it because it's on 33. We'll try 45. This is very stiff. No, the rim drive is not engaging. Okay, so this is the record it came with. Nice 78. So we'll try not to break this because this may be out of copyright. The man that comes round and should be coming round the mountain. Both foxtrots by Tommy Tucker and his orchestra with vocals. There's no stylus on either side of this cartridge, and I believe it might be dead. I'm not quite sure. So that is stuck on. Although there's... Okay. Okay. Not that this is going to get us very far, but we'll pull these off. And one more. So this came off, or the platter came off, and it was just stuck on with really hardened grease, as you can possibly make out. It's sort of all hairy as well. There's a few bits of hair in there. So it was actually stuck to this washer down here, which is the main bearing, even though it span quite well. Yeah, so it's very greasy and dried up. So let's try and get this. Aha. Okay. So this is now sort of semi-free. When this isn't too bad, this record player, I won't call it a turntable, but okay. Let's see if we can get this thing to, yep. So that will go down now, yep. Then at the end of the record, it will come back up again and hopefully go back into place. No, it just wants to continue its merry journey. Okay. So we'll set it there. Go to sneeze as usual. I suspect there's something in the heater because these have, we have units up in the roof which make a bit of a racket, but can't do anything about it. And they're a fan blown unit, so it blows all the rubbish out. So I might have to see about getting the system really cleaned out. The unit didn't pass its biannual test. The heat exchange had broken down, even though it's only 10 years old, and yes, it's well and truly dried up the grease. So what I'll do is go out to the garage and clean all this grease off and re-grease it. So so the idle wheel has a big crack in it across there, but it is quite, well, it's not that supple, but it's not rock hard either. So that will need to be replaced if I can get a replacement for it. So we know the mechanism actually works. So it's just really a matter of degreasing everything. Now, of course, taking it apart and degreasing everything and then putting it back together again. So the motor mounts look very nice. They're very subtle. So we'll need a new cartridge and new idler wheel by the looks of it. But otherwise, it's in pretty good nick actually. It's in very nice condition. The cabinet is in excellent condition, apart from a little nick at the back, the top back corner. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll clean all the grease off and we can see, and I'll work out what the voltage of the motor is, and we'll see if we can get it to run. So I have a bottle of isopropyl alcohol here, or IPA, and what I'm doing is just cleaning out in here. As you can see, I've already started this, and yeah, it's pretty disgusting. This is probably the original grease. So you've got to get it all out, because otherwise it'll contaminate the new stuff. Yeah. And you've got to do that for everything that has grease on it. Now this little part down here, which is the cam follower, which runs inside that track in, this needs to be free spinning, and this one is well and truly jammed up. So what you need to do is get a heat gun. I'm just using my one from and heat this up until you see grease flowing out the bottom of it. You'll need a pair of pliers. It's beginning to turn now. And you can probably pull this off. Yes, you can. I don't know whether you can see the grease is beginning to bubble up at the top. So that's 300 degrees centigrade that operates at. And yes, this is punched at the top, so this isn't removable. So what I'll do is I'll just put some oil in there, and we'll see if we can get it to spin freely once it cools down. Hopefully that'll soak in. I have soaked it in isopropyl alcohol for about 5 to 10 minutes while I was cleaning some other parts. May have to do this a few times. Still got grease on the outside of it. It's still fairly warm. Try and get as much grease off as you can. So otherwise it's just going to contaminate the new oil and gunk up again. So put a little bit more oil on there. Just a very small smidgen. And that's free spinning. Doesn't have to spin like a top, but it does have to spin and be well lubricated. So this is a 4-piece spindle, and there's a center shaft which moves up and down, and that should move pretty freely. There's also the record catch up the top here, and there's the 2 sides of the shaft. Would have liked to have pulled this out to lubricate it properly. It doesn't seem to want to. This is a mid or early to mid 60s unit, and the later ones were a little bit different. But just keep on working it up and down. Put a couple of drops of oil in there. It's definitely been oiled before. On later ones, this has a ball bearing underneath it. It's a bit longer. And make sure this moves very freely. This one fortunately does. I've worked on far worse turntables than this, where everything is rock solid. So the next thing to do will be to do the main bearing. So this just comes up and over, and it should have a race in it with 5 ball bearings, I believe. Yeah. So that will need a really, really good clean out. Also make sure you do the bottom bearing, and on some of the, that's going to need a really good clean as well. And just check this rubber O-ring here, and that seems to be quite happy. It's in amazingly good condition actually. So just make sure this is free of grease. Actually, that's not a two-piece arrangement. I've seen two-piece arrangements. This is just a sort of a tube, I guess, with that with a slot at the back of it. Yeah. Okay, I'll continue on my merry way, clearing out this ball bearing race, which is going to take a little bit of time, and I'll be back. The final piece to do is this piece, and this fits on top of here. There's an index point in there, and you might need to use the heat gun on this, just very, very gently, because you don't want to damage the rest of the wheel, if you want to call it that. And because too much heat will warp it, and you've got to make sure that these turn very smoothly. They don't come apart on this particular model, but some models they do come apart, and they're easier to clean. This one I'll just have to soak it in there, and make sure you clean out the inside of the bush and the axle. Make sure that's cleaned off. That is quite a sticking point. These need to turn a little bit, and then you can put it all back together again, and after greasing it up with silicone grease, which I will show you next. Now for grease, I use this stuff, Douse grease, which is actually food safe. It's sold in the plumbing section of Bunnings. It's made in Western Australia, I didn't realise that. It's non-toxic food grade grease, and it seems to be some sort of silicone or something like that. There's nothing on the product information on it. So with these ones, I just put a little bit dab of grease in here. It's pretty cold today, so it's going to be quite thick. And then I just spread it around. With an old screwdriver or something like that. You can also use silicone grease, and you can get that in car places. You better see where the old grease was, as it stains a little bit. So what I do is I just spread a little bit around. Where the wear marks are. You don't need very much. And put this down so it doesn't get everywhere. Now this needs to match up with this. So the best place is probably to do it around this area. Oh, yep, no, that's fine. What I'll do is I'll put a bit of grease on this. And around here. Don't need much on this because it's picking it up from the track. It should find the spot. Right. And you'll find that this moves much smoother than it did before. So that is quite loose now. Right. So the next part is these little bits down here, and what you can do is I'll just put a small bit on there. Oil this part up again. So what I do to get it down there is make these apart. So that goes there. And then just put some in there. Work it in. And then the other side. Work it in. and put the circlip back on again. Now I'll put some grease on this. I want to clean this up. It's still a bit stained. I have cleaned it quite a few times with the alcohol, but there's a lot of grubby stuff on here. That's I can actually feel that it's quite raised up. Looks like it might need a bit of a spray paint, but as this doesn't belong to me and you won't see it down in the trough, I don't think I'll bother. So this should move freely, and you know what I've done, or what I've not done, is put the grease in the main bearing. Bugger. Just put it back together for a moment and we'll see how well it spins. It's not perfect, but it's far better than it was. It's actually spinning quite well. There's no real resistance to it. Yeah. So now the underside of it is a little bit more complicated. Now before we go any further, there is this little cap on here to take off. We're going to find a suitable screwdriver. Should just come off without too much difficulty. Yep. So this is just a cover plate. Doesn't do very much. It does nothing at all except look pretty. Now there's quite a few points on these that need lubricating and the grease changed. So this here, the speed changer, which goes across here, this shaft here, which moves the, I suppose it's the pinch roller or the idler wheel up and down. Idler wheel is the right word. In the motor there are 2 points you need to oil. The top and the bottom of the bearing, or top and bottom bearings. This needs to be this needs to be greased. You'll find dead grease down there. Underneath there is a pivot point which needs to be re-greased. Around here needs to be re-greased, and we'll get to this bit later. Down in here, and this here needs to be re-greased. So there's quite a bit to do on this. You can probably grease this little bit here at the end. This needs a little bit of oil on it maybe. that's not critical. If this is moving along here, it needs to be greased because this will pivot on here. And yes, we'll get to that a bit later. So what I'm going to do is do all these points. This here needs a little bit of oil on it because it pivots. So I'll do around there. I'll clean this up and I'll do this bearing here. And then I'll be back. Now we can take this assembly apart here because there's grease underneath it. And you'll need to clean this surface off and under here as well. So that's the retaining screw and washer and spring. So don't get those out of order, otherwise you'll have trouble getting it back together again. I decided to take this screw out and clean everything off, as you saw just before, but when you put it back in, turn it maybe 3/4 of a turn or something like that. You'll feel it drop and click, and then that way when you tighten it up again you won't create a new thread in there. So make sure you do that and keep the original thread. If you over tighten it, you're likely to snap it off, so be very careful with that screw there. I've not taken this one off, but I have greased around the bottom of it. I've also oiled this pivot point here, and I've also greased up here where the speed selector goes. So you'll see that. This basically pulls the spindle up and down, and then the pinch roller or the pinch roller engages with the right diameter spindle of the spindle. Now on this particular one, these bits here, not sure about that one, but this is certainly plastic, so you don't really need to oil or grease that. If yours is metal, certainly have a look at it and make sure it's running smoothly. This one is. And finally I have re-greased under here. That's the center spindle for the records to drop down on. Next I'll turn the turntable around and we'll start working on this way. I think there's not much to support these on the wooden blocks, so yeah. Actually, I could probably put a little bit of grease down in here. So down in here where the slider runs underneath this spring metal. So I'll put a little bit of grease underneath there. Okay, so over to the arm and the return mechanism. So down here we've got lots of dried up grease. We've probably got some underneath here, but I'm not going to take this plate off if I can possibly help it, because these are under quite a bit of pressure and they're pretty difficult to get back on again. In fact, they're almost impossible. You've got to sort of push them down at one angle and push them across, and there's nothing to lever against with the pliers. There is a spring here, and this one looks like, can't tell whether that's glue or, that might be glue on that. Let's bring you around. Yes, that might be glue on that piece there, on the end of that spring. There's also pivot points down in under here. As you can see, this lifts up and down. This is part of the arm mechanism, and you need to get underneath here and get some grease underneath there, although this doesn't look too bad. This one is actually in pretty good nick, given that it's almost 70 years old and has been sitting in a shed for about 30 years. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll clean out all under here, and down here there's a couple of springs and things like that. This plate has got grease on it here, and it needs to be cleaned off and re-greased. So obviously that pivot point there will need to be re-greased as well. But I'm going to try and do this without taking this plate off. Sometimes you need to take the plate off, but there's a dirty great big spring there. And as I said, there's these two clips here which are almost impossible to put back on again. So you also need to get down in under here as well. There's bits of hair and things like that down there, so you need to clean all those out. That looks like a dead insect actually. There was a couple of spiders wandering around, very drunk looking, so they must have been hiding underneath this mechanism here. Now you want to make sure that this part of the mechanism is well lubricated. Down here. I've lubricated everything on this and even slid some grease underneath some of these sliding mechanisms here. There is another couple down here which I have to force grease into because that's not taking the plate off, and I have to distribute that grease a little bit more. I've oiled the pivot points for the thrust bearing for the tone arm, and I've also oiled the other arm that goes across and holds the records. So when we turn it, if I can possibly do this without tipping it over, we can see how this is operating. So that grease that you can see here, that will distribute itself after a few cycles. And it's turning very, very smoothly. In fact, so smoothly it goes backwards. What I'll do now is I'll work out whether this motor is 240 volts or 12 or 24 volts. I'm really not quite sure which. And then I'll lubricate the motor and we'll give it a spin and see what happens. I don't think there's any more points that I need to oil or grease, so it's pretty much finished and can go back into its cabinet when the radio is finished. Now the next thing to do is to lubricate this. This is the record size selector, and you need to get right down in there and you'll see what needs to be done. Alright, we have a working turntable, it seems. So I'll just lift this up with some insulation. Not sure if this is live or not. I'm not going to take the risk. So let's have a look. Now we can put this onto what is it? Okay, so we put this on. It's on 78 at the moment, so it's not fully wired up. And if I press reject, it puts it on. It gets to the end of the record, it goes off and tries again because the arm is up. Now if I bring the arm down and press reject, it turns itself off. So what I will do is I'll put it onto manual, the first position, and bring it across, and it turns itself off. So it is working quite nicely. Now I'll put it down to 45 and see if it'll do the same thing. Whoops, this is rather precarious. Okay, just turn the power off. Not very well balanced, but it'll do. Okay, turn the power back on again. 231 volts. Put it onto manual. Yes, the idler wheel is not round. I can hear it going thump, 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 thump. So I'll bring this across. Not quite sure why it did that. And off. Now it's on reject. Must be something to do with this arm being loose or something. So we'll go for manual. We'll put the tone arm across to that point. And it turns itself off. If this is, actually we'll put a record on there. Aha, that's better. Why didn't it turn itself off? Because of this arm. Okay, so it works well enough that I can continue to finesse it. So that's how you fix a BSR, Birmingham Sound reproducers, UA25. This is a 240 volt model, so make sure that your voltage and everything like that is correct. And yeah, sign off for now, and I'll speak to you another time.